Filtered coverage here on the attack by Iran on Israel. Let's bring in Mark Dubowitz, the CEO of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's been sanctioned by Iran and is actually just back from several weeks in Israel. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first off, I do want to ask you about your trip to Israel as all of this is developing here. Of course, the war now ongoing for more than 6 months. Just explain to me what you were there to do and what you were able to accomplish.
So I went over to Israel because I was very concerned that the attacks of October 7th, the brutal attacks by Hamas against Israelis, was really in many respects a weapon of mass distraction by the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, while Iran and the supreme leader were working away on their weapon of mass destruction. So I went to speak to the military and the Israeli government just to make sure that the Iranian nuclear weapons program was on the front burner. I was there when we heard the news about the Israeli strike in Damascus against the IRGC commanders and that key general that they took out, and was certainly there while the Israelis were anticipating an Iranian response, which we obviously saw yesterday.
What was the mood, the atmosphere like as Israel and the folks there were waiting for that response? I mean, there was no question that Iran was going to attack, but there were a lot of questions about what it would look like. So what was it like to be there on the ground? What was the atmosphere like?
Look, for Israelis, I mean, the regime in Iran has been at war with Israel for 4 decades. So certainly this is nothing new. They've been fighting that war against Israel through Iranian proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. So for Israelis, this is nothing new. I mean, they're just used to these threats from Israel. And this seems to be a big surprise for the world that Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, is directing all of this violence. So they were anticipating it. When I was there, the beaches were packed. People were in the restaurants and cafes and going about their business. And then the IDF obviously issued a warning for everybody to get inside, stay close to bomb shelters. Schools were canceled, and Israelis, again, unfortunately, are inured to this after decades of violence and war, and just took it in stride.
I know this is probably a fairly tough question to answer, as there are a lot of different possible answers here, but what is the significance overall of this attack by Iran on Israel? We're talking more than 300 missiles, drones, all of it directed right there at Israel.
It's significant because this is the first time that Iran has attacked directly from Iranian soil. As I mentioned, the supreme leader of Iran's strategy for decades has been to attack Israel through his proxies, to have some kind of deniability. Of course, everybody knows, or everybody should know, that Iran is behind these proxy attacks, having financed, weaponized, and trained these terrorist armies. But this was the first direct attack, and over 300 drones and missiles being shot at Israel is unprecedented and is going to require an Israeli response at a time of their choosing.
I've asked this question of a lot of people, but I want to get your take on it as well. Iran's mission here, what they were trying to accomplish, was it actually to cause extensive damage and cost civilian lives? Was it more to send a message, or was it kind of a mixture of both?
I think it was a mixture of both. I mean, I think the Iranians would have been very delighted if those cruise and ballistic missiles and drones had done extensive damage. There was one young 7-year-old Israeli girl who was severely injured, who's still in hospital, and some minor damage to an Air Force base. But obviously, Israeli air defenses performed spectacularly, having shot down 99% of those weapons, and with assistance from the United States and the Jordanians and the Saudis, the Brits and the French. So, I mean, a great display of air defenses. But one has to remember, and the Israelis certainly do, that one day those missiles and drones could carry nuclear warheads, chemical warheads, and do devastating damage to Israel. So the Israelis are going to have to hit back hard and send a message to the supreme leader that he can't get away with attacking Israel with impunity.
What do you think that a retaliation from Israel will look like? We're already hearing reports circulate that President Biden has warned Netanyahu not to do anything drastic, essentially, and really not to retaliate overall. What do we expect a possible retaliatory strike to look like?
So the Israeli military has been planning for years for strikes against Iranian military assets, leadership assets, economic assets, and certainly, I mean, the big target needs to be Iran's nuclear weapons program, which has been galloping ahead, particularly since the election of President Biden. It's expanded to the point now where the Iranians could break out to a bomb's worth of enriched weapons-grade uranium within 7 days, 5 bombs worth within probably a week, 13 within 5 months. They've started working on their warhead. They're going deep underground at a new enrichment facility in Natanz, which will be 100 meters underground, buried under a mountain, encased in concrete. When that enrichment facility is finished, it may be impervious to Israeli bombs and even American bombs. So the Israelis have a whole target set, and the question is, are they going to go directly at leadership assets, military assets, economic, or is this the time where they're going to strike Iran's expanding nuclear weapons program?
When you hear about the U.S., UK, other allies helping to shoot down the drones and protect Israel, this is actually some of the video that was released by the IDF showing those interceptions. Any of that surprising? I know one that stood out to a lot of people was the fact that Jordan did get involved, which many have said is fairly significant.
Yeah, I think what was surprising, I mean, I think first of all, the incredible capabilities, the air defense capabilities of Israel and its allies. Second, yeah, the allies that got involved. I mean, Jordan and Saudi Arabia in particular, I think demonstrates that Israel is not the only country in the Middle East that sees the Islamic Republic of Iran as a severe threat. That the Sunni states like the Jordanians, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Egyptians, and others recognize which country is the most destructive in the region, and that's certainly the Islamic Republic. So good to see close cooperation between the United States, Israel, and our Arab and European allies. But certainly the Supreme Leader is on the march through his proxies and his nuclear weapons program, and there's going to be much more to do.
Iran has now warned, they have said that the U.S. should not be involved or back any sort of retaliatory actions by Israel, saying that they will essentially attack U.S. bases. They've also threatened that if Israel does retaliate, there's going to be an even larger scale attack on them. Do Biden, Netanyahu, any of them really care about these Iranian threats? Do they take them overall seriously?
Well, I think Joe Biden, certainly in an election year, is doing everything possible to prevent a regional war. Certainly understandable. But I think what President Biden is not understanding is that, deterrence by denial is not going to work. You need deterrence by punishment. So merely having these excellent air defense systems and being able to shoot down Iranian missiles and drones ultimately normalizes Iranian direct attacks against Israel and certainly against U.S. troops and our allies. We need to practice deterrence by punishment. That means direct punishment on the Supreme Leader, his Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps shock troops, and the military and economic assets to sustain this regime. I think President Biden is not willing to do that directly. Even when there were hundreds of attacks against U.S. forces in the region, he went after proxies, not after Iran directly. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu understands that if you don't go after the head of the octopus and you merely fight the tentacles, that's a losing strategy.
We've used the term IRGC quite a bit over the past several days here, really several months or so. Can you break down who the IRGC is for folks who are watching and maybe don't fully understand? They just keep hearing the letters that are used over and over again.
Yeah, so the IRGC stands for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. These are the shock troops of the regime. After the Islamic Revolution, they were set up in order to protect the regime and the Islamic Republic, and they're also the regime's offensive weapon in the region. They operate through the IRGC Quds Force, which is the Overseas Auxiliary Force. That was the force that was run by Qasem Soleimani, who was Iran's most dangerous battlefield commander, certainly a global terrorist, and he was killed by a joint operation of the United States and Israel under the Trump administration. So the IRGC has an external face. It also has an internal face. It's responsible for the brutal repression of Iranians. And you've seen that over recent years when Iranian women took to the streets in this Women Life Freedom protests, demanding exactly that, life and freedom. And the IRGC and their internal security forces brutalized, murdered, raped, tortured, and imprisoned hundreds of Iranian women and men in putting down these protests.
All right. Mark Dubowitz there at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the CEO sanctioned by Iran and just back from that visit in Israel. Anything else you want to add about any of this here before I let you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we need to understand, and I think we've been following it over 6 months, right, is that Israel is surrounded by a ring of fire. This ring of fire has been established by Khamenei and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and includes Hamas and Hezbollah and all these terrorist proxies. And I think this weekend has shown, I hope, exposed to the world that the ring of fire is being lit and directed by the supreme leader of Iran. And the United States of America under Joe Biden needs to appreciate that this is a threat not just to Israel, but a threat to the United States as he expands his nuclear weapons program, develops intercontinental ballistic missiles, because that nuclear-tipped ICBM only has one address, and that's the United States of America. So Israel is doing the fighting and the dying against this brutal regime, but certainly U.S. national security interests are at the fore.
All right. Thank you again, Mark, for taking the time to be here with us and break down all of these developments. So much happening over just the last 24 hours, and I imagine folks will be paying very close attention over the next 24 hours or so. Thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you. Grateful to be here.